He was mocked and rejected until the fire ant invasion, where he proved his worth and value to the colony by saving them. Now, the colony faces an internal conflict while trying to recover from the invasion of the fire ants. Will the colony survive? Will the tiny ant save the colony again? Or will the colony fall? Let's find out on Warrior Ant, Civil War. Right Hand of the Queen. The large main room of the ant colony was bigger than the light from the glowing tunnels could reach. Dark areas hinted at the huge, complex tunnels underground. The air, usually full of busy ants, was now still and quiet. Even the usual smell of dirt and ant smells seemed softer, as if everyone was holding their breath. Small dust bits danced in the dim light from air shafts. The shiny backs of the ants gathered there caught the light, making them shimmer. They stood close together, their feelers, usually wiggling with messages, were now mostly still. Everyone looked at what was happening in front of them. Old rules about who was important set their places. The big, strong warrior ants stood closest, their powerful jaws barely moving. Behind them were the quick scout and food-finding ants, and further back, endless lines of smaller worker ants, packed together, watching quietly. On a raised platform made of smooth, yellowish rock sat the queen. Her power came not from strength, but from old wisdom and firm command. Her black body, once fully dark, now had thin silver lines on its edges, showing how long she had ruled. Her stomach, which pulsed slowly, the very heart of the colony, was indeed slower, a soft sign of time passing in her many duties. Still, her many eyes, dark and smart, were sharp, and the way she held her jaws showed a strong will that hid her age. Beside her, the royal guards stood like still statues, their large size and weapons showing they would protect her. But even their usually calm stances showed a little worry, reflecting the unease spreading through the colony. An even deeper quiet fell as the queen slightly moved, the soft scrape of her legs on the platform echoing in the big room. When she cleared her jaws, the sound, made louder by the quiet, rang through the cave like a ceremonial drum. This was a very old moment, a special act usually done by those from important families. The air felt tense with unsaid feelings and a growing sense that something unusual was about to happen. My loyal ants, the queen's voice, when she finally spoke, was surprisingly strong, a power that showed the steady spirit that had led the colony through many problems. You have seen the recent troubles that tested our strength. You have lived through the shadow of the fire ant attacks, felt the pain of losing ants, and tasted the bitter fear of being weak. But you have also seen something else. Her royal gaze swept across the gathered ants, stopping for a moment on the scarred ants from recent fights, on the hard-working ants who had rebuilt damaged tunnels, on the young ant babies, the colony's future, who looked up with wide, innocent eyes. You have seen great courage appear, she continued, her voice getting stronger, the flash of cleverness when things were very difficult, the strong spirit that would not be put out by the red flood. Her eyes then landed, on purpose, on the single ant standing before the platform. Axel the Brave. His name was still new, still felt a bit surprising, showing his recent rise from being just a normal worker. He stood a little straighter than usual, his feelers held high, feeling the weight of thousands of eyes on him. The faint, crossing scars on his plain outer shell shone in the soft light, each one a quiet sign of the fierce battles he had faced, the dangers he had beaten. He still had the faint, familiar smell of the lower tunnels, of the shared rooms and rich earth, a strong difference from the perfumed smells that marked the noble ants and the clean, sterile smell of the royal rooms. A shared gasp went through the closest ranks as the queen's eyes fixed on Axel. This was the key moment, where the unsaid tension would either disappear or become something much bigger. And it is in serious honor of such amazing spirit, the queen announced, her voice now ringing with a firm belief that allowed no argument, that I, your queen, guided by the wisdom of our ancestors but also by the clear truth of what my own eyes have seen, choose to break with the old and unchanging ways. Today, before you all, I name Axel the Brave, my right hand. The quiet that followed was not just no sound, it was a strong feeling, a thick, heavy blanket of disbelief, shock, and slowly growing understanding. It was the quiet of 1,000 minds trying to make sense of something new with the old rules of their society. Then, as the meaning of the queen's words began to sink in, a low, almost unseen shaking went through the gathered ants, like the first shivers before a rock slide. From the tightly packed lines of the warrior ants, one ant moved, his actions causing a soft ripple in the ants around him. General Varek. His very presence showed power and command. Bigger and more heavily armored than most, his shiny shell had marks from countless battles, each one a sign of his fierce loyalty, or so it had always seemed. His feelers, usually held with a sure command, now twitched with barely controlled anger, and a low growl, a sound of deep unhappiness, rumbled in his chest, heard by those closest to him. He was a living legend, a war hero whose name meant the colony's strength, and he was the queen's cousin. His family family line as pure and old as any in the colony. Whispers began to spread around him, like dry leaves rustling in a sudden, bad wind. A worker. Right hand. Impossible. Never in the colony's history. What madness has taken the queen? The murmurs spread quickly, a wave of disbelief and anger washing through the ranks. Varek himself stayed still for a long time, his many eyes, sharp and thinking, fixed on Axel. It was a look that held not just disapproval, but deep hate, a barely hidden rage at what he saw as a terrible breaking of the natural order. In his mind, Axel was not a hero, but a dangerous mistake, a sign of the queen losing her control, her emotional tie to a common ant blinding her to the careful balance of their society. He saw Axel's promotion not as a reward for bravery, but as a dangerous example, a crack in the strict structure that had kept the colony stable for generations. He believed the queen, in her old age, had become weak, swayed by feelings, too trusting of peace and those who had risen outside the normal rules. The fire ant attack, in his eyes, was not a sudden bad event, but a direct result of this supposed weakness, a failure of the old leaders to keep the colony strong through endless fighting. Axel, standing in the middle of this swirling mix of disbelief and anger, felt the full weight of their combined gaze. The honor given to him felt less like a victory and more like a crushing burden. He was very aware of the unseen gap that separated him from the noble ants, the deep-seated prejudice that stayed hidden beneath their shiny outsides. He saw the subtle sneers that flashed across the faces of the high-ranking warriors, the barely hidden hate in the eyes of those he had fought beside just weeks before. He was an outsider in this old world of family lines and traditions, a common ant pushed into the heart of their royalty. He heard the unsaid question in their shared silence, a question that echoed his own nagging doubts. Who am I to stand here? Do I truly belong? His eyes flickered, almost by accident, towards the queen. Her royal posture stayed firm, her expression calm, seemingly untouched by the chaos she had started. In her dark, smart eyes, however, Axel saw not just approval, but a deep and firm trust, a belief in his abilities that no one else had ever shown. It was this unexpected faith, this single light in the storm of disapproval, that kept him steady, that gave him the strength to stand his ground among the silent, simmering anger. He would not, could not, betray that trust. He would serve her, and the colony she stood for, with all his being, even if it meant facing constant suspicion and clear hate from those who believed he was nothing more than a new upstart, a worker who had dared to rise above his place. The weight of his new title, the queen's right hand, settled on him, heavy with duty and full of unseen dangers. The rise of the legend had begun, but the seeds of a bitter fight had already been planted in the rich ground of tradition and anger. The queen's choice immediately created a heavy feeling. While Axel stood there, confused but important, and the queen stayed calm, General Varek didn't wait in the shocked quiet of the court. With a quick nod to a nearby captain, a huge warrior named Krell who had many scars from battles, Varek turned and walked with purpose, his jaws clicking, towards a less busy part of the royal rooms. Krell, an old soldier whose loyalty to Varek was strong from fighting together and winning for years, understood what Varek wanted without words. He quietly told two other trusted soldiers, a fast and smart scout named Lyra and a quiet, strong warrior named Borin, to follow their general from a safe distance. Varek led them through smaller, plainer tunnels, away from the main paths and the curious feelers of the court ants. He finally stopped in a dimly lit side room, a place usually used to keep battle plans and maps. The air there smelled strongly of dried ink from fungi and old, paper-like leaves. Here, among the tools of war, Varek finally let out the anger that had been hidden under his calm outside. His feelers twitched wildly, and a low, rough growl came from his chest. Did you hear? Varek's voice was a low whisper, barely heard, but full of barely controlled rage. Krell, his wide body casting a long shadow in the dim light, nodded. The queen's words were surprising. General. Lyra and Borin stood silently behind him, their feelers sensing the change in the air, the clear anger coming from their commander. Surprising. Varek's jaws clicked sharply. It's an insult, a terrible thing, a worker, put above the very royal family of this colony. Has the queen lost her mind? Has old age finally made her confused? Lyra, always practical, spoke carefully. Axel did show great bravery during the fire ant attacks. General, many lives were saved because of his actions. Varek's eyes snapped towards her, his many eyes burning with anger. Bravery is what every soldier must do. He did his part, like we all did. Does that mean he deserves such a high position? What message does this send to the warrior ants? That their years of training, their sacrifices in battles, mean nothing compared to the sudden choice of a queen swayed by feelings. Borin, an ant of few words but strong loyalty, finally rumbled, his voice deep and strong. "It causes unhappiness, General. I have heard whispers among the soldiers. Ants who have bled for this colony feel forgotten." Varek nodded seriously. "Exactly. This isn't just about one new worker. This is about the very base of our society. The Queen weakens the strong parts that keep us safe. She goes against the natural order, the very way of doing things that has protected us for generations." He walked around the small room, moving restlessly. And for what? A short moment of being a hero. An emotional connection to someone she once didn't even notice. He stopped suddenly, his gaze becoming hard. "No, this cannot continue. The Queen has made a big mistake. And for the good of the colony, to keep our traditions safe, for the sake of our future, this mistake must be fixed." Krell's feelers lowered slightly, a sign of his strong loyalty. "What do you plan, General?" Varek's voice dropped even lower, becoming a secret whisper. "The Queen has shown weakness. She has made a choice that harms her own power. Others will see this. There are those among the nobles, among the experienced warriors, who share our worries, who see the danger in this big change." He paused, his eyes looking over his loyal captains. "We must find out how much support we have. We must make them doubt the Queen's judgment. We must make them see that her actions threaten the colony's stability." Lyra's smart mind started to work fast. "Quiet questions, General, among trusted friends." "Exactly," Varek confirmed, carefully. "We cannot let the Queen or her new favorite know. We must move with care, with precision. We need to understand the situation, find those who would stand with us." Boren's massive jaws clicked in agreement. "And if we have enough support, General," a cold shine appeared in Varek's eyes, "then we will take the necessary steps to bring back order. The Queen has forgotten her place. We will remind her." He didn't clearly state what he intended, but the cold determination in his voice said a lot. The seeds of a revolt had been planted, fed by anger and a perceived threat to the established way of life. The path to a divided kingdom had begun, built with whispers and secret meetings in the hidden parts of the royal rooms. The days that followed were a perfect example of clever, quiet control. Varek, outwardly keeping his calm look and doing his duties, moved with a quiet goal. Krell, Lyra, and Boren, acting very carefully, began to ask their trusted contacts among the warrior ants and the lower noble ants how they felt. Lyra, with her large group of informers among the scouts and messengers, was especially good at figuring out the general feelings. She spoke in hints, saying she was worried about the unusual change in the Queen's favor and the possible instability it might cause. She listened carefully to the answers, noticing the flicker of worry in the eyes of experienced soldiers who felt their years of service were not valued, and the barely hidden anger among nobles who saw Axel's rise as an insult to their family lines. Krell, with his direct way of speaking, targeted those warriors whose loyalty to Varek was strong. He spoke of the Queen's questionable choices and the disrespect shown to the warrior ants' traditions. He stressed the possible dangers of letting a worker, who didn't know much about war and planning, have such power. His words connected with those who felt a deep pride in their fighting skills and who were suspicious of those outside their group. Boren, through his quiet but important presence among the older, more respected warriors, showed a feeling of deep unease about the unnatural order that was starting. His statements, though few, carried weight, and his unsaid disapproval of Axel's promotion was clear. Slowly, carefully, a picture started to form. While there was general respect for the Queen and an understanding of Axel's bravery during the recent crisis, there was also a strong feeling of unease and anger. Many felt that the Queen's decision was too quick and not well thought out, a dangerous change from the old rules that had served the colony for so long. The warrior ants, in particular, felt disrespected, their years of hard work and sacrifice seemingly made less important by the sudden rise of a worker. Among the lower noble ants, there was a fear that this new example could break down the very base of their own special status. Varek listened carefully to the reports from his captains, his mind already forming a plan. He knew he couldn't act without thinking. The Queen still had much respect, and directly challenging her power would likely be met with resistance from those who remained loyal. He needed something to cause it, an event that would shake the colony's faith in the Queen's judgment and create a chance for him to take control. He spent hours in the planning room, looking closely at maps of the colony, his feelers tracing the complex paths of tunnels and rooms. He thought about different situations, weighing the possible dangers and rewards. He needed an incident that would seem to be a direct result of the Queen's supposed weakness, something that would start fear and anger among the general ants. It was during one of these long, solitary hours that the idea began to form. The recent fire ant attacks had left the colony shaken and weak. The fear of another invasion still lingered. What if a new danger appeared, one that could be directly blamed on the Queen's softness, her misplaced trust in peace? The idea was dangerous, bold, but it had the potential to strongly turn public opinion against the queen. Varek began to create a plan, a dark and dishonest scheme that would throw the colony into chaos and prepare the way for him to gain power. He knew it was a risk, but the perceived insult and the possible problems from Axel's promotion had made him more determined. He was willing to risk everything to bring back what he believed was the right order of the ant colony. The seeds of the takeover were planted, waiting for the right moment to grow into open rebellion. The royal meeting was held in the Great Hall, a huge cave whose ceiling was very high, held up by massive pillars of hardened earth. Glowing fungi, grown over many generations, cast a soft, pulsing light, showing the complex carvings on the walls that told the history and stories of the ant colony. The air buzzed with the nervous energy of the many ants gathered. Representatives from every group were there, the noble ants, with their shiny backs and complex smell marks, the disciplined lines of the warrior ants, their powerful bodies showing they were ready, the tireless workers, their smaller bodies showing their endless labor, the fast and watchful scouts, and even the young ant babies, carried in the jaws of their caretakers, their innocent eyes wide with interest. The queen sat on the platform, Axel standing respectfully by her side. His presence there was still a cause of unease for many, a constant reminder of the queen's unusual choice. General Varek stood among the high-ranking warriors, his usual stern face showing nothing of the trouble inside him. But his gaze, when it flickered towards Axel, held a cold, hard focus. The reason for the gathering was supposedly to celebrate the recent win against the fire ants and to recognize the brave actions of those who had shown great courage. The queen spoke of working together, of being strong, and of the importance of uniting for the colony's continued success. Her words were met with polite but somewhat quiet clicks of agreement. The underlying feeling of unease caused by Axel's sudden promotion had made the celebratory mood less bright. As the queen began to praise individual acts of heroism, calling forward scouts who had given important information and workers who had tirelessly fixed damaged tunnels, a sudden, sharp crack echoed through the great hall. It was a sound unlike any they had heard before, a violent break in the familiar underground sounds of their world. Panic immediately broke out. Ants screamed, their high-pitched chirps filling the cave. The glowing fungi flickered unevenly as the very ground beneath their feet seemed to shake. A cloud of dust and bits rained down from the ceiling, and a strong, unfamiliar smell filled the air, sharp and choking. In the middle of the chaos, as ants rushed for safety, their usual order temporarily forgotten because of the unknown terror, a second, stronger explosion ripped through the air, this time coming from near the royal platform. The force of the blast sent shockwaves through the hall, knocking ants off their feet. The air filled with smoke and the screams of the injured. Amidst the confusing chaos, a figure moved with quick, firm action. General Varek, who had been placed strategically near the platform, shouted orders to his most loyal soldiers. Secure the area, protect the queen, but his actions seemed less focused on protection and more on taking control. As the smoke began to clear, a terrible scene appeared. The area around the royal platform was destroyed. Injured ants lay scattered among the broken pieces. The queen herself was slumped against the shattered remains of her throne, appearing unconscious and badly hurt. And then, Varek's voice, made louder by the sudden quiet that followed the explosions, cut through the stunned disbelief. Look, this is what happens because of the queen's weakness. Her focus on peace, her misplaced trust in outsiders. She has made us weak, and now our home has been attacked. His words, though blaming and spoken amidst the chaos, found ready acceptance in the already existing unease and anger. Fear, raw and basic, began to grip the colony. The carefully built unity had broken, replaced by confusion, terror, and a growing feeling of betrayal. In the swirling smoke and confusion, Varek took his chance. He told his loyal soldiers to block the exits, effectively taking control of the Great Hall. He shouted orders, his voice full of power, showing himself as a decisive leader in the face of disaster. Axel, who had been standing beside the queen when the explosion happened, was thrown back by the force. Dazed and confused, his first thought was to reach for the queen. He fought his way through the panicked crowd, his heart pounding with fear and a slowly growing sense of dread. When he finally reached the platform, he found the queen as he feared, injured and not responding. As Axel knelt beside her, desperately trying to see how badly she was hurt, Varek's voice boomed again, this time directed straight at Axel. You, worker, you were a trusted friend, her right hand. What did you know about this? Were you perhaps working with the attackers? The accusation, though untrue, felt heavy in the air, fed by the existing anger towards Axel's sudden rise. Suspicion flickered in the eyes of many of the gathered ants. Before Axel could even think of a reply, Varek's loyal soldiers moved forward, their powerful jaws snapping threateningly. Seize him, Varek commanded. He will be questioned. But Axel, his mind racing, understood the danger. This was not just an attack, it was a takeover. Varek was seizing power in the chaos, using the tragedy tragedy to his benefit. He knew he had to act quickly to protect the queen. Ignoring Varek's commands and the threatening advance of the soldiers, Axel gently but firmly lifted the queen's injured body. He knew the main tunnels would be full of Varek's forces. His only chance was to escape through the less-known passages, the hidden routes and service tunnels that crisscrossed the colony. With a burst of energy, fueled by loyalty and desperation, Axel fought his way through the confused and terrified crowd, carrying the queen in his jaws. He knew he was now a marked ant, a fugitive in his own colony, but he also knew that he was the queen's only hope. Varek, seeing Axel's escape, roared in anger. "Traitor!" He runs away. After him, he is working with the attackers, a reward for his capture. "Whoever brings me Axel will be generously rewarded." And just like that, the kingdom was divided. One group, gripped by fear and swayed by Varek's accusations, saw Axel as a suspect, a threat. The other, those who had seen Axel's bravery and trusted the queen's judgment, were left in stunned disbelief. The once unified colony had broken apart, the seeds of civil war planted in the dust and smoke of a devastating explosion. Axel, the unlikely hero, was now a fugitive, carrying the weight of a fallen queen and the hopes of those who still believed in him into the complex shadows of their underground world. The cruel rule of General Varek had begun, built on fear, suspicion, and the remains of the old order. The tunnels outside the main ant colony were very different from the well-kept ones inside. Here, the glowing light was weaker, making long, moving shadows that hid dangers. The air was thick with the old smell of dead leaves and damp earth. Axel, his feelers always wiggling, moved through these risky paths. The queen's weight was a constant burden and a constant reminder of the job ahead. He moved with urgent speed, needing to find a safe place before Varek's soldiers could find them. The reward for catching him, surely made bigger by Varek's lies, would turn every ant he met into a possible threat. He stuck to the less used paths, the empty rooms and service tunnels he had learned about when he was a worker, knowledge that was now very helpful. The queen, though still asleep, was stable. Axel had managed to stop the bleeding from a wound on her chest with a special plant paste he had learned about from an old worker ant. But her breathing was still shallow, and her condition made him constantly worried. He needed to find a place where she could rest and get well, a place far from Varek's reach. Days blended into a routine of endless travel and short rests. Axel looked for food and water, his worker instincts kicking in, helping him find edible fungi and hidden water drops on the tunnel walls. He avoided other ants, his trust in his old colony broken by Varek's betrayal. Finally, after what felt like forever, Axel found a group of old, empty tunnels that seemed to go deeper into the unexplored areas beneath the colony. These were very old paths, older than even the current queen's family, filled with sounds of a forgotten past. He found a mostly dry and hidden room, lined with soft, decaying leaves, and gently laid the queen down. As the queen rested, Axel went deeper into the abandoned tunnels. He found small groups of ants who had been sent away, thinkers who had questioned the colony's strict beliefs, scouts who had reported bad news and been pushed out, and even a few warrior ants who had left because they didn't like the colony's increasingly aggressive ways. These were ants who, for different reasons, had been seen as unwanted by the main colony and forced to live on the edges. At first, they were careful around Axel, but they became interested in his story and the sight of the injured queen. They had heard whispers of the trouble in the main colony, mixed up bits of information carried by the occasional wandering ant. Axel's arrival gave them a clearer, though upsetting, picture of the harsh rule that had taken over. Among these exiles was a wise old ant who found food, named Ilara, whose knowledge of the surrounding tunnels and their resources was unmatched. There was also a quick-thinking planner named Zephyr, a former royal scout who had been sent away for questioning the queen's earlier military decisions. And surprisingly, a few warrior ants, led by a strong but honest ant named Ronan, had also found safety in these forgotten tunnels, disgusted by Varek's brutal methods and his clear grab for power. As Axel shared his story, a shared goal began to appear among these different ants. They had all been cast aside by the main colony, but now, brought together by a common enemy and a wish to bring back fairness, they saw a chance to fight back. Zephyr, his mind already thinking about battle plans, began to study the layout of the abandoned tunnels and how they could be used for defense and attack. Ilara shared her knowledge of hidden paths and places to store resources that could support a resistance group. Ronan and his warriors, though few, offered their fighting skills. Slowly, carefully, a rebellion began to form in the shadows. Axel, the unlikely hero who had once been just a worker, found himself in the role of leader. The exiles looked to him, not because of his family line or position, but because of his courage, his loyalty to the queen, and the spark of hope he represented. But the weight of leadership was heavy. Axel often found himself full of doubt. "I'm no planner," he would tell the still asleep queen. "I was just lucky. Lucky to be in the right place at the right time. Lucky to survive." It was during one of these moments of sadness that the queen finally moved. Her eyes fluttered open, and she focused on Axel's worried face. Her voice was weak, barely a whisper, but her gaze was clear and full of the same strong trust he remembered. "Axel," she murmured, her feelers gently touching his. "You weren't lucky. You were willing to see the path others were afraid to walk. You have a strength inside you, a courage that comes not from rank or training, but from the heart. Trust it." Her words, though weak, deeply affected Axel. He looked at the small group of exiles who had put their faith in him, at the queen who had seen his worth when no one else had. He realized that he was no longer just a worker ant who had stumbled into being a hero. He was a symbol, a bright light of hope for those who wanted justice to return and Varric's harsh rule to end. The abandoned tunnels became their main base. Zephyr began to create strategies, using the complex network of paths to their advantage. Ronan started training the new resistance group, improving their fighting skills and teaching them discipline. Ilara organized groups to find food to make sure they had enough supplies for their growing numbers. Axel, learning quickly with help from Zephyr and Ronan, became the central figure, the one who inspired them with his strong determination and his true belief in their cause. He was no longer just fighting for the queen, he was fighting for the spirit of the colony, for the ideas of fairness and justice that Varric had so cruelly thrown away. Their first actions were small but important. They hurt Varric's supply lines, stopping the flow of resources within the main colony and causing unhappiness among the workers who were suffering most from his harsh rule. They spread whispers of the queen's survival and Axel's resistance, offering a tiny bit of hope to those who were angry under Varric's strict control. The world outside the main colony, once a place of exile and difficulty, had become a safe place and a training ground for a new kind of warrior, one driven not by blind obedience, but by a fierce desire for freedom and justice. The underground rebellion had begun, a small flicker of defiance in the darkness, fueled by the courage of a worker ant and the strong spirit of a queen who had lost her power. The path ahead was full of danger, but for the first time since their exile, Axel and his unlikely friends felt a surge of hope. The fight for the colony had just begun. The first attacks of the hidden rebellion were like secret bites in the weak spots of Varric's rule, quiet but causing more and more problems. Guided by Zephyr's smart plans and Ilara's deep knowledge of the colony's less protected paths, Axel's small group of rebels moved very efficiently, like ghosts. They didn't attack the heavily guarded warrior posts, but instead aimed for the important routes that kept Varric in power, the supply lines. These routes, once busy with endless worker ants carrying rich food spores and needed building materials, started to have unexplained delays and losses. Rocks placed carefully blocked important tunnels, needing days of hard work to clear. Piles of gathered resources vanished overnight, leaving confused ants looking for food with empty jaws. Key message lines, which used special scent trails laid by messenger ants, were quietly messed up, leading to confusion and wrong directions in Varric's command. The effect on the daily lives of the ants inside the main colony was clear. The once steady flow of food became uneven, leading to longer lines at the shared eating rooms and a growing grumble of unhappiness among the worker ants. Building projects, important for the colony's growth and upkeep, stopped because of a lack of materials. Even the warrior ants, at first safe in their special position, began to feel the problem as resources became scarce and their patrol efficiency was hurt by communication failures. Varric's response was fast and harsh. At first, he brushed off the problems as accidents or the work of a few unhappy ants, but he soon realized these incidents were planned. His suspicion, already present, began to boil over. He made his control over the colony tighter, increasing the patrols of his loyal soldiers and putting in stricter rules for movement in the tunnels. Suspicion fell heavily on the worker ants, who were put through increasingly harsh questioning and watching. The once unquestioning obedience of the colony began to break down. The harsh methods used by Varric's enforcers caused anger, especially among those who remembered the queen's kinder rule. Whispers of the ruler, and a longing for the old ways, began to spread in the darker parts of the tunnels, helped by the quiet messages spread by Axel's group. Varric, sensing the growing unrest, fought back with public displays of power. He held grand parades of his most heavily armored warriors, their shiny backs gleaming under the glowing light, a strong reminder of his military might. He gave fiery speeches, speaking badly of the traitors and troublemakers who tried to make the colony unstable, painting Axel as a dangerous criminal working with outside enemies. But his words sounded empty to many. The shortages and the oppressive atmosphere spoke louder than his announcements of strength and safety. Even some of his own soldiers, especially those who had served alongside Axel and seen his true bravery during the fire ant attacks, began to have doubts. The clear difference between Varric's selfish speeches and the queen's selfless leadership was becoming more and more obvious. Meanwhile, within the hidden network of abandoned tunnels, the rebellion grew stronger and bolder. Inspired by Axel's strong will and the clear impact of their sabotage efforts, more exiled ants and unhappy ants from the main colony sought safety and joined their cause. Zephyr's strategic planning became more complex, including surprise attacks and distractions to further break down Varex's control. Ronan's training turned the mixed group of exiles into a disciplined fighting force. Axel, driven by the need for more important information, understood the limits of their current methods. They were chipping away at Varex's power, but they lacked knowledge of his closest group, his long-term plans, and the true extent of his military strength. He knew that to truly free the colony, he needed to go into the heart of the enemy. The decision was very dangerous, but Axel knew it was necessary. Hiding himself as a common worker, using the scent masking tricks he had learned in his old life, he prepared to sneak into the main colony. Ilara gave him worn-out worker's shell and taught him the subtle ways of moving and walking of the lower groups to help him blend in. Zephyr carefully planned his route, finding less guarded entry points and safe places within the complex tunnels. Ronan gave him a small, hidden weapon, a sharpened piece of black glass, for self-defense. The sneaking in was a tense and dangerous task. Every meeting with another ant brought the risk of being found out. Axel moved through the familiar tunnels, now under the harsh watch of Varex's patrols, his heart pounding in his chest. He kept his feelers lowered, his movements humble, his gaze away. He listened carefully to the conversations around him, gathering small bits of information about Varex's troop movements, how resources were being used, and the general mood within the colony. He learned of the forced labor put on captured fire ants, now working hard in the deeper tunnels under the watchful eyes of Varex's supervisors. He heard whispers of a new, big building project in the outer areas, whose purpose remained secret. The air within the colony was thick with fear and suspicion, a clear contrast to the friendly feeling he once knew. It was during his secret exploration of a restricted area near the royal chambers, an area now heavily guarded by Varex's elite soldiers, that Axel found a terrible truth. Hidden within a series of heavily reinforced planning rooms, he discovered detailed plans and strategic ideas showing Varex's ultimate goal, the invasion of neighboring ant colonies. The documents revealed a terrifying plan to take advantage of the weakened state of their neighbors, who were still recovering from their own recent conflicts. Varek intended to gather a huge fighting force, made stronger by the forced labor of the fire ants and, most worryingly, by forcing younger ants, child soldiers, into his ranks. The size of his ambition was shocking, a brutal and cruel search for power that would throw the entire region into war. The realization hit Axel with the force of a physical blow. Varex's takeover was not just about taking power within their own colony, it was the first step in a campaign of conquering, driven by greed and a desire for control. The Queen's warnings about Varex's aggressive tendencies, once dismissed by some as the unnecessary worry of an aging ruler, now echoed with chilling clarity. Armed with this damaging knowledge, Axel knew he could no longer rely only on sabotage and whispers of rebellion. The fate of their colony, and possibly many others, was at stake. He had to return to the underground resistance and deliver a message that would light a fire in the hearts of all those who wanted peace and justice. His escape from the heavily guarded rooms was a risky dance with discovery, but his urgency and the weight of his discovery gave him desperate courage. He slipped through the patrols, using the shadows and his knowledge of the tunnels to avoid being seen. Back in the relative safety of the abandoned tunnels, Axel gathered the leaders of the rebellion, Zephyr, Ilara, and Ronan, and showed them the horrifying truth of Varex's plans. The news sent a shockwave through their group, making their determination stronger. The time for quiet resistance was over. Axel knew they had to act decisively, to gather not just the exiles but the entire colony against Varex's harsh rule and his coming war. He climbed onto a raised rock in their main chamber, his small figure silhouetted against the faint glowing light. His voice, though not the loud command of a general, was full of a strong belief that captured the attention of every ant present. "My brothers and sisters," he began, his gaze sweeping over the gathered rebels. "We fight not only for ourselves. We fight not just to get back the past, but to secure a future free from the shadow of harsh rule. I have seen the darkness in Varex's heart. His ambition has no limits. He plans not just to rule us, but to make slaves of our neighbors, to send our children to war in a brutal search for power." A murmur of shock and anger rippled through the crowd. He took the throne through lies and violence, twisting the tragedy of the attack for his own gain. Axel continued, his voice rising with strong feeling. "He rules through fear and oppression, silencing those who disagree and hoarding resources while our colony suffers. But his true goal is far more evil. He wants to throw the entire region into chaos, to build an empire on the backs of innocent ants." He paused, his gaze meeting those of the warriors, the thinkers, the food gatherers, the diverse group united by their desire for a better future. "We do not fight to take power for ourselves," Axel declared, his voice ringing with honesty. "We fight to give it back to those who lost it, to the Queen, to the ideas of fairness and kindness that once guided our colony. We fight for the right of every ant to live in peace and safety, free from the harsh rule of a warmonger." His words hung in the air, full of emotion and truth. A wave of determination washed over the gathered rebels. The time for hiding in the shadows was over. The time for action had come. Axel, the once small worker ant, had become the voice of a revolution, his rallying cry echoing through the underground tunnels, a promise of hope in the face of overwhelming darkness. The battle for the colony, and perhaps more, was about to begin. Axel's powerful speech lit a fire in the rebels' hearts. The time for quiet defiance was over, the moment for open rebellion had arrived. With Zephyr's smart plans and Axel's steady leadership, the varied group of exiles got ready for their daring attack on the center of Varrex's rule. Zephyr, using his deep knowledge of the colony's tunnels, created a plan with many parts. Small, quick teams would sneak in through less-known entrances, causing distractions and cutting off Varrex's communication lines. Ronan and his warriors would lead the main charge, attacking important places like the central soldier rooms and the main supply areas. Axel, with a small group of his most trusted followers, would push straight towards the royal rooms, aiming to face Varrex and, if possible, free any ants still loyal to the queen who might be locked up. The attack started under the cover of a fake cave-in, planned by Alara and a team of skilled diggers who carefully weakened support structures in an unused part of the upper tunnels. The shaking and dust cloud that followed caused widespread panic and confusion in the main colony, giving the rebels a key chance to sneak in without being seen. Small teams of rebels, quick and fast, slipped through the chaos, shutting down guard posts and cutting off sent message trails. Varrex's once efficient network of control began to fall apart, replaced by isolated groups of resistance and confused soldiers unsure of their orders. Ronan and his warriors, their battle cries echoing through the tunnels, started their direct attack on the central soldier rooms. Years of being sent away had sharpened their skills and fueled their determination. They moved with a fierceness that surprised Varrex's soldiers, their attacks swift and sure. The sound of ant shells hitting each other, jaws snapping, and high-pitched ant battle cries filled the tunnels with the sounds of war. Meanwhile, Axel, leading his main group, moved through the less guarded paths towards the royal rooms. He moved with a single goal, his determination fueled by the image of the injured queen and the terrifying thought of Varrex's planned conquests. Along the way, they met small groups of resistance, but Axel's presence, the sight of the once mocked worker now leading a rebellion, inspired hesitant ants to join their side. Workers, tired of Varrex's harsh rule, and even a few unhappy warriors, joined their growing numbers. As the rebellion moved deeper into the colony, Varrex's initial confidence began to weaken. The planned nature of the attacks and the rebels' fierceness caught him off guard. His communication lines were broken, and his soldiers were spread thin, struggling to stop the widespread uprising. Paranoia began to eat at him. He suspected betrayal within his own ranks, questioning the loyalty of those who had once seemed unshakable. The queen, though still weak, was not doing nothing. Learning of the rebellion's advance through a network of loyal ants who had managed to avoid Varrex's watching, she gathered what little strength she had. Supported by a small group of devoted royal guards who had stayed hidden, she began a slow but determined walk towards the center of the fight. Her presence, though not on the front lines, served as a powerful symbol, a reminder of the rightful ruler and the cause they fought for. The peak of the battle came closer as Axel and his group finally reached the royal rooms. They found the entrance heavily guarded by Varrex's best soldiers, their armor gleaming threateningly. A fierce battle started, Axel fighting with a desperate courage he never knew he had. He moved with agility and cleverness, using the narrow tunnels to his advantage, his obsidian shard a deadly weapon in close fighting. As the fighting continued, a figure came out of the inner rooms, General Varrex himself. His body was marked with dust and dirt, his feelers twitching with rage. He fixed his gaze on Axel, his eyes burning with hate. "You tiny insect!" Varrex roared, his voice echoing through the room. "You dare to challenge me? You will pay for your betrayal." The two leaders faced each other, the colony's fate hanging in the balance. The ants around them, both rebels and loyalists, stopped fighting, drawn to the unavoidable confrontation. The duel was brutal and raw, a fight of desperation against brute force. Varrex, with his greater size and strength, pushed his attack, his powerful jaws snapping with deadly intent. Axel, though smaller and less heavily armored, was fueled by his strong resolve and the support of those who believed in him. He dodged Varrex's clumsy attacks, his movements quick and unpredictable, using every opening. "You'll always be just a worker," Varrex mocked, his voice thick with contempt as he landed a glancing blow that scraped Axel's side. Bleeding but not giving up, Axel stood his ground. "Then let this colony remember what a worker can do," he shot back, his voice filled with defiance. With a final surge of strength, he lunged forward, his obsidian shard finding a weak joint in Varrex's armor. Varrex roared in pain and stumbled back, his movements becoming slow. Seeing their leader wounded, Varrex's remaining loyalists began to waver, their spirits breaking. The flow of the battle had turned. Just then, a weak but determined figure appeared at the entrance to the royal rooms, Queen Lyra. Her presence, though weakened, showed an undeniable sense of authority. The sight of their rightful ruler, still alive and standing against the one who took her place, broke the last bits of Varek's control. His remaining soldiers, their loyalty torn and their morale shattered, they lowered their mandibles and surrendered, acknowledging the queen's authority. Varek, defeated and surrounded, could only stare in disbelief at the queen and the worker ant who had brought him down. His reign of terror was over. With Varek defeated, the fighting slowly stopped. A wave of relief and great joy washed over the rebel forces and the loyal ants who had suffered under Varek's harsh rule. The queen, supported by Axel, took back her place on the platform, her presence a symbol of the restored order. But the queen, having seen the divisions and suffering the colony had endured, made a very important decision. Speaking to the assembled ants, she declared, her voice clear despite her weakened state, "The path of tradition has led us to conflict and division. The bravery and leadership shown by Axel, a worker who rose above his position through courage and strong belief, have shown us a new way." In a historic move, Queen Lyra announced her decision to step down from the throne. Instead of naming a successor from the royal family, she declared that the colony would start a new era of shared rule. She named Axel as the colony's first elected leader, to be advised by a council chosen from representatives of all groups, workers, scouts, warriors, and nobles alike. The decision was met with a shocked silence, followed by a slowly growing wave of approval. The workers, who had long been overlooked, cheered loudly. Even the nobles and warriors, humbled by the recent conflict and recognizing the wisdom in the queen's decision, eventually gave their support. In the final scene, Axel stood in the highest room of the colony, the glowing light casting a warm glow on his once simple form. He was no longer the tiny, overlooked worker. He was no longer just a hero. He was the symbol of change, the embodiment of a new era of unity and equality for the ant colony. He looked out at the busy tunnels below, filled with the renewed energy of a colony healing and rebuilding together. But deep in the shadows, far beyond the borders of their territory, a faint, chilling hiss echoed in the darkness. A foreign voice, filled with evil intent, whispered, "War has weakened them. It is time." The threat beyond their borders, only hinted at before, now loomed, suggesting that the hard-won peace might be fragile and that new challenges awaited the newly unified ant colony under the leadership of Axel the Brave. The story of their internal conflict had ended, but the next chapter in their struggle for survival was about to begin.